Welcome to the latest edition of the Dynamic Political Centrism podcast, hosted by Alan Steinberg, produced by Dr. Yonatan Yoni Yaris the Doc. This week's special guest, Brent Johnson, political reporter for NJ.com and the Star Ledger.
Good evening and welcome to Dynamic Political Centrism. I am the voice of Dynamic Political Centrism, Alan Steinberg. I thank, as always, our ace producer, Dr. Yonatan Yaris, who gives us the finest productions in high technology. But tonight is a special honor for me for a lot of reasons. Tonight we have as our guest the star journalist of the Star Ledger, Brent Johnson. He is a journalist of the highest quality, but let me give you a historical perspective on Brent. The Star Ledger played a great influence in my life. They've recently moved, as many newspapers and periodicals have, they moved from being a journal of a print medium, and now they are fully on digital. And I think, however, that their digital range is excellent. And I think that with digital, they will reach a lot of people so that they will have the benefit of the Star Ledger. Star Ledger had many great journalists. They had Dan Weissman, my good friend, Paul Molshine. I ended up in a disagreement with him, but I always venerated him and his journalistic inquiry and diligence. Also, Dave Wall was a great one from the Star Ledger. He used to interview me, and after his interviews, I thought I would get excoriated in the press the next day, and it usually was a good story. And also Joe Sullivan. But Brent Johnson is in my view, and I have basis for saying this, he's part of a new generation of political journalists covering state politics. In my view, he is the finest I have seen, and I've seen a number of them in the United States of America. He is that good of a journalist. I think he's the tops in the country. But not only that, he can do television well. He appears on Reporters Roundtable. He's sort of like Felix Millan. He's a Mets fan. He's sort of like Felix Millan used to be with the Mets. You know, Felix could play second base, shortstop. And sort of like Brett Beatty is right now. He's holding up with the Mets. He can play second base. He can hit it out of any park, including Yellowstone. So that's
maybe like Joe McEwing. Joe McEwing was my favorite utility player growing up. So
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last thing you said.
Joe McEwing was my favorite utility player growing up. He could play anywhere for the Mets.
Oh yeah. I even remember George Theodore. You talk about
the Stork. Yep.
Yeah, historic George Theodore.
Yep.
But to have a fellow Met hat, I have their city version cap on, and Brent has the shirt.
My Mets, because Pete Alonso just broke the Mets record tonight, and the Mets
he hit the 253rd?
53rd in the third inning. So there we go. My favorite. And they're winning 5-1 right now, so let's see if they hold that, because they need a win badly.
They need a win. I'm sending someone over to my synagogue to put in a special prayer for the New York Mets. I am 75 years old. I'm a few years older than Brent, but I go all the way back to the Brooklyn Dodgers, and the Mets are the spiritual descendant of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Every time I go to Citi Field, I feel like I'm going into Old Ebbets Field. But really, to have Brent here is a real pleasure, and I thank you for making time for us. I would make a baseball analogy. Brent is so versatile. He reminds me of Jerry Koosman, who didn't just rely on a fastball, but he had a whole variety of pitchers, and he always would come through in the clutch. So, Brent, you're among Mets family here, and thank you so much for showing up.
Nice. Happy to be
here. As has been recently in our podcast, I've done a lot of talking, and I'll keep quiet after the following. But I always give our listeners, those who listen regularly know, and I always give our guests a full disclosure on me. I was an active Republican in state and federal government for many years. When Donald Trump came into being, I'm about the most anti-Trump Republican you could ever find in America. But I left the party, but I still supported people like Jack Ciattarelli. And in this election, I'm supporting Jack Ciattarelli. I make this all clear because I think it's important that the viewers have a basis for judging my credibility one way or other. But the thing that I admire about Brent's form of analysis, is that he knows how to merge politics, policy, and the law and give us a synthesized report. So, Brent, this is terrific to have you here. Thank you so
Happy
much.
to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, I want to start off this way, and I'm going to do this sort of in the fashion of Theodore H. White, the author of The Making of the President books. He would normally start off a section of his books talking about the view from, and one candidate he'd say the view from where that candidate lived, and the other candidate he would say the same thing, the view from. Now, I'd like you to give our listeners right now how you see the view from Montclair, the home of Mikey Sherrill. What do you think is the perspective of the Sherrill campaign right now? Are they confident of winning? And what do you think? We're nearing Labor Day, which is the traditional kickoff, although you kick off much earlier nowadays. Where do you think their strategy is now, and what do you think is their perspective?
I think what we've seen is that she's really the main crux of her campaign is tying Ciattarelli to Trump, and that kind of implying that he is going to be an acolyte of Trump and will follow the president in New Jersey. And that seems to be the main point. Her main point is if you get Ciattarelli, you get, basically the Jersey version of Trump, which, as we know, Ciattarelli was not always a Trump supporter. He was a critic in the past, and he's done an evolution on Trump in this election. But that's really the main thing. She's lately been making energy costs part of her campaign, and but she, you really see her as she's a federal official, so it makes sense that she would tie him to Trump. But that's the thing you're seeing in almost every one of her tweets, almost every one of her campaign statements. There's some form of saying that you'll get a fighter against Trump if you're me, but someone who agrees with Trump if you get Jack Ciattarelli. And that's her view, and they're confident. The insiders tell me, their internal polling shows similar to what we've seen in recent polls. It's a high single-digit, low double-digit race that she's ahead, which makes sense. It's a Democratic-leaning state, but Ciattarelli made significant ground on Governor Murphy 4 years ago, ended up losing by 3 points. So most people consider this to be a very tight race, that they should not be too confident because it's going to probably narrow in the final 2.5 months of the campaign.
I share your perspective, but let's hear first what you think the Ciattarelli perspective is, and then I'll give a quick synthesis of where I think everything is going.
Yeah, Ciattarelli obviously was a major Trump critic when he ran for governor the first time in 2016-17. He was straddled the line a little bit more in the last campaign, and this time he's actively said he supports the president. And I interviewed him directly after winning the primary, after he was endorsed by the president. And I asked him, thinking that he might pivot a little bit because we're a blue-leaning state. And he said, right now, the key phrase being right now, I support what the president is doing. And he, for the most part, some people were surprised at that they thought he might be more critical now that we get into the general election, have to worry about independence. But he recently broke from the president in two places: job cuts at Picatinny Arsenal and the plan to build a detention center or house migrants, immigrants at Fort Dix in South Jersey. So you saw him break from those two things, but he held a MAGA rally at the Jersey Shore this past week. There's still talk that maybe Trump comes in to campaign for him. But he is focusing much more on state issues, which makes sense because he's a former state lawmaker. He has experience in Trenton. You see him talking more about taxes and affordability. You don't hear him mentioning the word Trump as much. And the general thought among the insiders in Trenton is if Jack can make this race a race about local issues, taxes, Murphy, energy costs, that he has the advantage there and she does not. The question is, kind of what does the state in general think about Trump, and how much does that play into the race come the fall?
I share that exact perspective, and I will infringe upon the Brent Johnson copyright. I share exactly what you have said. But let me ask you this. There's one mystery I have in this campaign. I will not predict. I have over the years made good analyses, but I am not a good predictor. My analysis is always better than my prediction. I'm not going to predict anything in this race until about the last week, and I see how the trends are going. But I share exactly what you said, but I have one coda to that, as we say in music. My feeling is if the state focuses on, if the election focuses on state issues, Jack has an excellent pathway to win. If it focuses on what Mikey wants, which is sending a message to Donald Trump, then she remains as the favorite. There's one mystery to me, however, and that mystery, his initials are Phil Murphy. I can't tell. There have been so many polls about him. I'll tell you a story about him 4 years ago because I had a good relationship with Jack for a while. Then we had a falling out because I disagreed with him on Trump. Today, I have totally set that aside because I know that he would never govern like Trump. And I also know this about him that he did it for reasons of party loyalty. You can't be nominated for governor unless you at least are willing nominally to support Trump. So, I decided that was the only thing he could do. And I don't want to use forgave. It's not my power to forgive or not forgive. I put it this way. I set that aside and I regained my old Jack Ciattarelli enthusiasm. However, what I can't tell is whether there is a negative Murphy effect on Mikey Sherrill, because I don't know whether, there's one criticism, by the way, I have with the press on, and this is not on you, because this was not on you in your area. Back in 2021, Murphy had a serious problem with COVID and a serious problem with people dying in the nursing homes. And he was never held accountable for that, in my view. The people who, and this is not just true of the Star Ledger, it's true of all the papers, all the media. They never really held him accountable as to who was responsible for what was a real tragedy. We had a woman, I live in Highland Park, who was a member of our synagogue and a very venerated woman. And she had survived the Holocaust, but she didn't survive COVID because they put her in a nursing facility where she got COVID. They didn't separate her from other COVID patients, and she died. So that remains an open sore with many people, the way Murphy handled COVID. I want to get your perspective on that. I feel he was never held accountable.
Yeah, there was talk about having legislative hearings at one point. I mean, it helps when you have one party have control of all branches of government. And there was talk about having legislative hearings at the time, and it never really came to fruition. Part of the problem was Steve Sweeney, who was one of Murphy's critics in the legislature, got ousted from office. That might have played a little bit into it. There was certainly, our paper did a lot of reporting on the nursing home issues. I know the DOJ did a critical report, and Murphy did an internal report that talked a little bit about it, but wasn't like a huge mea culpa. And I think that's part of the reason why the race was so unexpectedly close in 2021. You also had people who were still upset about how long schools were closed and how long restrictions were in place. So it was a big soup of COVID backlash. I feel like with the benefit of time passing, it's not as much of a focus anymore. You don't hear either candidate really mention COVID. It's kind of in the rearview mirror. But yeah, Murphy certainly had his critics on those things. And I remember I did an exit interview when Judy Persicelli, the state health commissioner, left. And I asked her about that. And it's part of the legacy and a part of the questions that will be part of what the retrospective we look at from Governor Murphy, because he got a lot of praise early on for shutting things down and making hard decisions when no one knew what was going on. The question was, were there mistakes made after that, and how long did it go on? I mean, how long did they go too long with the closings? But it's something that you'll definitely see when he leaves office in a few months. That'll probably be something that is discussed.
Well, where do you think he stands with the voters today? Let me tell you one thing I think helps him, which has been smart politics on his part. He really gave back a lot of money that the state had, and the localities had collected in terms of taxes. He had programs like Jersey Freeze. He had the Anchor program. These programs, and you're one of the best policy writers I know also, these programs put money in people's pockets. And when people, it's just like with Brendan Byrne in 1977, he sent out the rebate checks. He'd been running behind Ray Bateman. And Ray Bateman said the moment he got a rebate check at his home, it was only for $200, he knew he was finished. Okay. Yeah. So that's been a good factor for Murphy politically. Whether one thinks that the real estate taxes should be administered like that, that's we could do 3 whole shows on that. But I think that helps his popularity and makes him less of a negative for Mikey Sherrill. What do you think about that?
Yeah, he's never, aside from the beginning of COVID when he got really high marks, just like how Christie got high marks after Sandy.
Right.
He's pretty much been in the 40s and 50s, for the most part in the last few years. The most recent poll showed him in the 40s. So he's never been very unpopular in a blue state, but he's also never been, only in the beginning of COVID was he superly popular. Right now, the feeling I get, he's close to Trump in popularity in the most recent polls. In fact, one poll had Trump ahead of him. So this will be a good barometer, this election. Most usually after 8 years, voters tend to see governors wearing out their welcome type of thing. Maybe not Tom Kaine, but he might be the one who breaks that view. But, generally, we saw it was such an extreme example with Christie leaving office with, low double-digit approval ratings. Maybe that colors Murphy a little bit more positively. You see, he's in the 40s. He never got to 14 like Christie did. But yeah, it's widely thought this election would be a dual referendum. On the Democratic side, it's going to be a referendum on Trump, and on the Republican side, it's going to be a referendum on Murphy. And, people just after 8 years, they tend to be like, it's why we tend to go back and forth between governors so often in terms of party. You have, Jim Florio went to Christie Whitman, went to, Jim McGreevey and so on. Chris Christie, then to Phil Murphy. So I do think there's a bit of, okay, we've had 8 years of that. Let's try the other one. But it'll be interesting to see how much does any animus against Murphy outweigh the animus against Trump.
That is, I think, a lot of a key to this election, because if there is a Murphy negative factor, of course, it's obvious it'll help Jack Ciattarelli. But I usually have not the greatest instincts, but pretty good instincts as to what is going on in the street, how people feel. I really can't gauge that about Murphy. And I didn't gauge it 4 years ago. He's a very understated person. I don't say that in a good or bad way. But I remember having a conversation with Jack Ciattarelli back in 2021. He was teasing me because I had said, I don't think you can win. I said that in my columns. I said that on TV shows, radio shows. I said, I don't think he can win. He said, Alan, I'm going to win. And he almost won. And I'll tell you one thing. I'm going to skip ahead on my list of topics because this fits in right now. He won because the African-American vote went very solidly for Murphy. I was on the phone with Leroy Jones election night. I said, what's happening? The race was so close. And at one point, Jack Ciattarelli was ahead. And there was something like only 5% of the vote that remained uncounted. And Leroy's told me on the phone, he said, well, Phil Murphy's going to win. I got the votes right here. He had the reading from the precincts in Newark. He said, Phil Murphy has it. He's going to get overwhelming in Newark. I think he got something than 90% of the African-American vote. I don't think he's going to get that this time. I saw the best pollster out there, in my view, is Dan Casino. And he reported in the African-American community, something like 58% for Mikey Sherrill, and only 20%. But that's high, though. 20% is high as compared with what Republicans have done in the past in the African-American community. 20% for Ciattarelli. Now, there's a lot of undecided African-American voters, which could be a factor in the election. I mean, what's your feeling on that?
Yeah, I actually just wrote about this for my newsletter, this the most recent one.
I love your newsletter.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, that's one of the big questions in this race is how important is getting the black vote? Because the poll showed Mikey is leading, and it's widely considered black voters have been a big voting bloc for Democrats, especially black women. Black women tend to be very loyal to Democrats. But I kept hearing insiders say she's really struggling to connect with black voters, especially because Raz Baraka is who she beat in the primary, and they had a candidate who they felt they could connect to, someone who understood the urban vote. And now they had this white, relatively moderate Democratic woman who represents the suburbs of Essex County be the nominee. And they said they couldn't quite. I had a black female leader, a Black Women of New Jersey CEO, Shanique Taliaferro, tell me some women were finding it hard to connect with Sherrill. And you see that in the polls. And plus, Trump did much better with black, Hispanic, and Asian American voters in the last election. He didn't win that vote, but he definitely swung towards his direction. So if you add all that together, maybe the thought is maybe if Jack doesn't outright win the black vote, he can peel enough away or inspire enough of them to stay home that it really hurts Sherrill, and that could make the difference.
Yeah, I've talked to him, and he is very focused on people of color. He plans to be more active after Labor Day, in terms of outreach to the cities, and he's not taking anything for granted. I also saw this was in your article. I saw this where in your newsletter where it said that I believe in the Hispanic vote was something like 41 to 24. That's
Yeah.
not such a big margin.
No,
So
it's not. And yeah, they both are going to play a big role, and that you see Cheryl's team is working on this. She went on a tour with the Black CEO leader I mentioned of Trenton to go to an urban neighborhood, and they definitely see this as something they have to pay attention to, and Jack does too. And the argument there is that not only do people swing towards Trump, but Jack is going to meet black voters where they're at and go to their communities and go in there and really try and win them over and say, I'm the person who could help you with affordability issues and those type of things. So you're going to see this be a major issue over the final 2.5 months.
I agree. Let me say something that emanates from my own pro-Citarelli bias, and I don't expect people to necessarily agree with me, but there's one advantage I see with Citarelli, and it's an advantage that I say he has over any candidate of either party I've ever seen. Even our greatest governors, people like Tom Kean, they won because they had great records, they did great things, great accomplishment. But Jack has a degree of personal magnetism that I have never seen in a Jersey candidate. And I think it stems from certain factors. Number one, and I relate to this because I'm very Jewish ethnically and religiously, he's a very proud Italian. And I think people love that. I heard somebody, and I've taken this for one of my forthcoming columns, he's sort of the Dean Martin of New Jersey. Mm-hmm. He really is. They used to say men wanted to be like Dean and women admired Dean. And he has a lot of magnetism. And regardless of what ethnic group, he will be able to walk with African-American leaders and they will feel comfortable with him because people have a tendency to feel comfortable with him. And he's comfortable in his own skin. For example, if you go to his Wikipedia site, it has his first name is Giacomo. I love that because in my family, everyone went by their Yiddish name. So there's a certain I'm not saying this is going to be decisive in the election, but when people get to know Jack Citarelli, there's a lot of magnetism there. And, I don't know how journalists feel about that, especially accomplished journalists like yourself, but I think it's going to be a factor.
Well, I'll tell you a story. I was at one of the debates in the Democratic primary, and I was talking to a Democratic insider, and I had some people came up to me in my personal life, like friends and family, being like, "Well, of course, Mikey's going to win. It's a Democratic state. It's a blue state. Jack's got a real uphill battle." And I was talking about this with this Democratic insider, and the person said to me, "Well, you have to look at just a brass tacks. Jack feels like the kind of guy who that guy. Everyone has a Jack Citarelli in their neighborhood.
He's a Jersey guy.
Yeah, and that's one thing that Democrats have not taken for granted about him. They say, like, you go down the street, you're going to see guys that talk like Jack Citarelli, and that's a real benefit that he has. So yeah, he does, and you'll hear Democrats say it. And I had a Democratic operative tell me that, yeah, Jack's charming, and it's gonna be tough, but then they say, but the Trump ties are going to be the biggest thing for him to overcome. Like he leads on state policy and on charm, but did he shoot himself in the foot with tying himself so much to Trump this time? That's to be seen.
Yeah, it remains to be seen, and I would not gamble a prediction on that because it could go either way. Let's say Trump every day seems to have some terrible crisis. I think that what he is doing now, sending troops into Washington, is a disaster. Now, whether it has an effect on the African American vote in other localities, I don't know. I really can't tell that. But let's say Trump all of a sudden has some good luck. Let's say the economy is running better in October than we would have thought. For example, I'm a very anti-tariff person. I think by 2026, tariffs are going to be a disaster for the Republican Party. But it may not be such a disaster come November of 2025 when New Jersey votes. And the economy right now, inflation remains what it is, but it's actually less. And I supported Joe Biden very strongly. that it remains less than what it was under Joe Biden. So if the economy is better, my point is not that it proves Trump to be a good president. I think he's a disaster of a president. But he may have some latent popularity that may throw all the Democrat analyses off because, if Trump is popular at that point, and I'm not saying he will be, I wouldn't bet on that, but if he's not terribly unpopular, the Trump factor will not be as strong.
Yeah, and you'll hear any people on both sides say this may come down to what is the state's opinion of Donald Trump come the end of September, early October, end of October, and that really could be the deciding factor. And the calculus, when I hear people ask why is Chitterelli not backing away from Trump now, like he doesn't need him, and the calculus that I've understood is that, you don't want two things. You don't want to alienate the base so early on. And two, you don't want to kick Trump in the teeth and give him a reason to retract his endorsement in a giant tweet that'll get every national news outlet covering.
That's true.
So, but the question is, will we see Jack be a little bit more careful in the final months? Because, I don't expect Cheryl to pull up on every tweet you're going to see. It's going to say like, Trump is sending troops into the National Guard. What say you, New Jersey? This is what Jack Chitterelli wants. So it's really going to be a proxy war on that respect. So, yeah, I mean, it may come down to what does the state feel about Trump come October?
I think there was one aspect that I saw in another poll other than the Dan Casino poll. The Dan Casino is holy writ with me. That there was something on the affordability issue that said the Republicans in general have an advantage. I'm not looking for ways to get high on my own wine, by the way. I'm just looking for possibilities here, and I'm trying to avoid wishful thinking. But I did see something that said there are two components of affordability, basically. One is housing and the cost of housing, but the other is taxes in general. And the Republicans seem to have an edge on the tax factor.
Yeah, well, you've had 8 years of Democratic rule. You have had a lot of tax relief, as you mentioned, senior freeze, anchor, stay in J. You can argue about the validity of any of those programs, but it has put money back in people's pockets. And Murphy recently had a credit rating upgrade again from S&P. And, he's going to, I mean, the spending has been a lot higher during Murphy's tenure. And the question is the bottom about to fall out for a new governor in the state budget? But, and then the thing is just taxes. Taxes objectively, a number of different taxes in little places have gone up. Early in his first term, the interesting thing about Murphy, his first term, he was much more progressive. He brought marijuana and a millionaire's tax and a higher minimum wage to the state, was unabashedly saying that he wanted to make New Jersey the California of the East. And then he got knocked for a loop with the close election, and you kind of heard him drop that. And in some ways, he's no longer the darling of the progressive wing of the Democratic Party that he used to be. So there's a lot of places for Republicans to say, well, give us a chance. We're the party that can bring down your taxes. So that has traditionally been the case in the last few decades, that Republicans are seen as the tax cutting party. So I could see Republicans making that more of an issue after we're on the other end of Labor Day.
Now, what about the housing component of affordability? Has any candidate, either one of the candidates, come up with something which you think could have a real political hook to it? Because that's almost as big a factor as taxes are in terms of affordability.
And it's a sticky issue, and it's a complicated issue. Trying to explain to people the history of affordable housing in New Jersey is like telling them to find, something in the dictionary that is easy to understand. Like it's a tough issue, and Mikey has really focused on saying that she wants to bring more affordable housing to the state. That's been her affordability pitch, saying she wants more transit hubs and things of that nature. It's been more general on the Republican side. I know they're against the mandates that the state gives towns. But yeah, affordable housing, which is, again, a really big general issue. But that's, again, another one you're probably going to see hyped up over the final weeks.
What strikes me, though, is these two issues have been out there. I'll use a Roosevelt phrase, again and again and again.
Yeah.
These issues never go away.
No.
And I think that there is a certain cynicism among the public as to whether anyone really has a solution, whether it's Cheryl, whether it's Chitterelli. I think there's a cynicism among the voters that they think that neither one of them is going to be able to solve these problems. And the question is, how does that cynicism affect their vote? Do they end up voting for their party of family choice and habit, or do they start to think the other way? I don't know.
Yeah, that's a tough one. It used to be a lot more cut and dry, I think. It used to be, all politics is local, and it seems lately these days all politics is national. So it's kind of gotten muddied a little bit as to whether you just vote along party lines. But again, we're a state. We tend to kick out the other party in the governor's office and go to the next one. The last time that a one party won 3 straight terms in the governor's office was 1961, which for perspective, that was 3 years before the Beatles played on Ed Sullivan and a year before our beloved New York Mets even existed.
That's true.
I mean, it's a long time that one party has won 3 in a row. So the historical trends tend to be on the Republican side here. And yeah, it's just these are quintessential New Jersey issues, and taxes, spending, affordable housing, and we tend to be a bellwether state for that reason, because as New Jersey goes, so go other states of like us. So yeah, and a part of the other problem is that in the last 8 years you've had one party rule in all branches of government. And the question is, if Jack wins, and the legislature stays all Democratic, is he going to have trouble putting his agenda through? Or is he going to come up with some sort of deal that Christie cut with the Democrats to get some of his stuff through? It's just so many layers to this race. This is a really I can't stress enough how fascinating this race is, and the fact that it's one of only 2 in the country, and the other race, Virginia, doesn't seem to be as tight. So I mean, New Jersey, all eyes are kind of on New Jersey this election cycle.
I'll tell you, I have the same Jersey fascination that you do.
Yeah.
The great thing about living here is I'm a political junkie. Okay. Mm-hmm. New Jersey has an important election every year.
Yes.
The first year is the presidential election, and everyone understands the significance of that. The second is the gubernatorial year. The third is a legislative year where you may have, one, actually, no, the third is the congressional year, where you have a situation where you may have a U.S. Senate election as well. And the fourth year is the pure legislative year, where you may have one or both houses of the legislature up. So every year there is something to get interested in. And, for a journalist like you who comes from New Jersey, you're a Rutgers graduate, it's got to be very fulfilling for you.
Yeah, and I grew up around this. I mean, my father was a radio broadcaster, and back in the day, I used to host the Ask the Governor program when it was Jim Florio as the governor. So when I was a kid, I got to see this all firsthand, and it's just You mentioned all of our governors going back to, Brendan Byrd, Tom Kean. They all were national figures. Tom Kean delivered the keynote at the '88 convention. Jim Florio made headlines for, guns and taxes. Christie Whitman, Jim McGreevey obviously had made his own headlines for different reasons. And, right through Chris Christie and now what we have going on now. So we're a small state, a relatively, compact, most densely populated state with 9 million people. But, we also have a reputation for our corruption, which I think gains a lot of attention too. And I think that's part of the reason when you ask our voters just kind of like everything's corrupt. I think someone did a poll recently, it might have even been Dan Casino, that said like most people think all their politicians are corrupt in New Jersey, but they're just going to vote anyway. So we're an interesting interesting political soup, New Jersey.
Well, you mentioned 2 things that hit home with me. The corruption. I think there's almost a certain, I don't want to say honor in the corruption, but there is it makes for a certain amount of humor. It shouldn't, but people love to talk about corruption. They like to talk about all the corrupt figures, the Billy Mustos of his time in Hudson County. I know that when I first got involved in politics full time, I was serving as a senior policy advisor on education to the Republican majority in the Assembly after they took the veto-proof majorities back in 1991 election. And so I came in with that group, and I started studying Hudson County, and it was fascinating. It was like studying a sovereign state, you know? And I used to read Peter Weiss, may he rest in peace. And the way he would describe Hudson County, it was like he was writing a fantastic Pulitzer Prize book, because of all the characters that they had out of Hudson County.
I mean, if you just look at just in recent history, you had a U.S. senator who was indicted, did not get convicted, and a few years later was indicted and convicted in a very cartoonish case that involved, something out of Sopranos with gold bars and, Egyptian influence. So, us in Chicago, it's always the two you always hear about being the two very political places that also have their corruption.
I'll never forget one story involving corruption in New Jersey. I was the head of the Meadowlands Commission, and I was a Republican appointee. I was appointed by Governor Whitman, and I was dealing with all Democrats except for one town, was North Arlington in the Meadowlands region. But I got along very well with the Democrats. It was sort of an understanding. They couldn't hurt me because I was appointed by the governor, and until she left, I would have the job. And I couldn't hurt them because their towns were solid Democratic. So we got a lot done. There was no reason for us to hurt each other. But I'll never forget, in 2000, I was down in the 2001. I went on the train trip. Does that still exist? I don't think it does.
Yeah, it came back this year, actually, the chamber train.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. The train. One thing about New Jersey, you get credit just for showing up.
Yeah.
It's easy. I'll never forget when I was the first term of Bush, I was SBA regional advocate. The second term, I got my dream job, which was East PA Region 2 administrator. But in my first job, when Tom Sullivan, my boss, came to New Jersey, I took him to the State House, and everybody knew me. Now, it wasn't that I have a great personality or that I somehow had touched wonderful nerves or anything like that. It wasn't that at all. In New Jersey, everybody knows everybody. If you just show up, the governor knows you, everybody knows you, and it makes politics here more on a human level, I feel, and it makes it fun. All the journalists know you, and just I feel at home in Jersey politics.
Yeah, it's both a welcoming and non-welcoming place sometimes. But yeah, it's you never, Michael Aaron, the great late Michael Aaron, said that New Jersey politics never lets you down because it gives you something to cover. It gives you something colorful always to talk about.
There was a man I loved.
Yeah, Michael was all of us.
I had him over for dinner one night at my home, and he told us the stories of his run-in with Bill Clinton, and he had all my guests spellbound the way he told the story. It was really something. But there's another aspect that will be of historical significance. I became very friendly with Jim Florio. I had been not an enemy of his, but I've been a political adversary. And then one day I invited him to my office at EPA because environmentally, he was a national figure. Mm-hmm. And environmentally, he was one of the great men of America. So I invited him in. He was going to stay for a half hour. And I was learning so much of him. I said, "You're not leaving." I said, "You're going to stay here until I let you go." And so I ordered food. And he had a great time. He loved to teach. Teaching was in his soul. And after that, I left EPA when Barack Obama was elected and the Republican administration was over. I became friends with Florio, and we'd get together. He loved to talk history, as I do. So we would get together every month. But he always admitted one mistake, which may or may not happen this time. He admitted that when he ran for governor in 1981, he made the mistake of running against Ronald Reagan. Now, Reagan was a good and decent man, whether one agreed with him or not. He wasn't Donald Trump. He was not Donald Trump by a long shot. But he ran against Ronald Reagan. And even though Reagan was not popular in terms of his policies here, people liked him. And that backfired on Florio. He ended up losing to Tom Kean by a very, very small margin back in 81.
Yeah. And
he later admitted, he told me this a number of times. He said, "I made the mistake of running against a popular president rather than focusing strictly on Jersey." And, I think of that nowadays, although in all fairness, Reagan is not Trump and Trump is not Reagan. But we're going to learn in this election whether one is making a mistake or not when they focus on national issues and they don't talk about state.
I had someone tell me early on in this election, right after the primary, and I brought up the fact that, no Republican or no party has ever held the governor's office 3 times in a row in 64 years. And someone said to me, "Yeah, but we've never had a president like Donald Trump." that's the X factor here. And, that's generally proving to be true, although we won't find out for another 2.5 months, whether that's the case. But yeah, Trump, as in everything, I put this in the column the other day, Trump colors everything.
Yes, he
And,
does.
and, and I think that was part of the calculus with Chitterelli this time in embracing Trump, is that, he was going to be tied to Trump either way. And why not at least get the political capital out of it?
Well, I
But
think that's why he did what he did.
yeah, and it's just interesting to see whether how New Jersey, which has gotten relatively bluer in recent years, but also has then went back red a little bit in recent elections, what trend prevails. It's, again, like I said, really interesting race.
There's so many unanswered questions, and one of them just happened about a month and a half ago when we got our utility bills.
Yeah.
I live in an apartment. I got my utility bill. It was off the chart. I felt like I was an investor in PSE&G when I got
Right.
that bill. But I don't hear people running to the street. I don't hear people running to the streets and saying, "Look at that damn Murphy. Look what he did to us." I don't hear that. It doesn't seem to have hurt him. It doesn't seem that they're blaming any one person. He may have dodged a bullet on that. I don't know.
Yeah, the recent poll, the FDU poll, showed that no one seems to know who to blame in
Right.
that case. And you basically tend to blame whichever the opposite party you support. Yeah, it'll be interesting though. I keep hearing, it'll be in my newsletter this week, I keep hearing from operatives and insiders that this is going to be an issue that doesn't go away and keeps getting louder. It's a question of who can capitalize on it better. And people are now just starting to get their utility bills, and they're like, oh my God, maybe they don't know who to turn to yet. And maybe it's not a Florio situation in '93, where we saw there was just so much backlash against Florio that it helped carry Whitman. We haven't quite seen that yet. Maybe more people need to get their bills, or maybe people just don't pay as attention to local issues as much as they do national, and that might be part of Cheryl's calculus.
Well, that'll help her if that's the case.
Yes.
I'm wondering if there may be a local effect with the utility bills, and I'll tell you what it may be. Offshore wind was very unpopular down around Atlantic City, and that region. Sometimes in gubernatorial races will go Republican, sometimes Democrat. I think Chitterelli did very well in Atlantic County and Cape May County last time. And the question is, I don't think the issue of offshore wind has gone away, and whether it will have any salience that would help turn up Chitterelli's vote down there. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if it's become that type of thing as an issue that is strictly partisan or divided that way. Like, I don't know how I live in, you live in Middlesex County too. I live in Spotswood,
Right.
and
Where do you live?
I live in Spotswood, so not very far from me. And I grew up in East Brunswick. So, and I went to Rutgers. I have never really, I'm like Bruce Springsteen. I've never lived like 5 miles away from where I grew up. But yeah, you don't hear people talk about offshore wind, and you don't walk around Brunswick Square Mall and hear people talk about offshore wind. But it makes sense because in Atlantic City, the windmills are going to be off the coast. So I don't know if that issue is going to drive, but utility bills is something everyone gets. Everyone gets a utility bill. Everybody gets a tax bill. And sometimes it takes for that sticker shot to take effect before you really see an effect on the polls. Or again, maybe it doesn't hit as much. That's one of those, like you said, many unanswered questions.
Well, I think that what you're pointing out, in effect, is that the candidates have a job to do in terms of focusing the voters. Right now, people are at home. They're upset. They're PO'd because they got this high utility bill. They want to go out and buy clothes for their kids, and they're ending up paying $400 for a utility bill that's in an apartment. That's not an exaggeration. I live in an apartment, and my utility bill for last month was $394, but I had to have the air conditioner turned up the whole way because of my age. I could have fainted. Literally.
Yeah, it's been very hot. It's been a very hot summer.
And today was a day from hell in terms of the heat. So the hotter it gets, it may be better for Chitterelli. His vote varies directly with the heat.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it depends. This is where the political consultants have a role. They have to get the voters to focus on the issue and to blame one side or other. And we haven't seen really the ads on this yet. So
No.
I'm going to be fascinated to see what it's like when they come out.
Yeah, I think everything. That's why I keep saying post Labor Day is going to be interesting because that's really when you'll start to see ads come out, and we'll see which tack they take. Um, we're going to learn a lot in those first few weeks after September starts.
Now, Mikey Sherrill, I find this interesting, and I'm not saying this is a negative about her. She came in, she got a lot of Washington TV media because she came in with the class of Abigail Spanberger, who's a cinch to be elected governor of Virginia from everything I can see. And also she came in with Elissa Slotkin, who was elected a U.S. Senator from Michigan. So she came in with that class, and that class had a lot of media coverage. So Mikey has benefited from that. I don't say it's unfair. I would try to do the same thing that she has done. But there seems to be a difference. Being in New Jersey, what I call the AOC Democrats, which aren't so popular, have a stronger role in things. I know it seems to have influenced their vote on Israel, which is a big focus for me. But I think that that limits. The other two candidates were called the Mod Squad, and they were moderate, and they stuck with the centrist position, and that's helped both of them. She doesn't seem to have that much room for maneuverability in New Jersey, given the fact that AOC Democrats are really influential here.
Yeah, and it's something she ran into in the primary, that she was definitely considered among the moderate candidates in the primary, whereas you had Baraka and Fulop being considered the progressive wing of the party. So someone once said to me about her that she straddles the line. Sometimes she can play with the progressives and sometimes she can play with the moderates. And, so, yeah, she had a very high profile entree into the House. She won a seat that Rodney Frelinghuysen held for many years, and it was considered a Republican district that she flipped, and she's held on to it, especially after the congressional maps were redrawn. But yeah, I mean, I describe her as a relatively moderate Democrat. That's at least how she is now.
Right.
I didn't really cover her time in Congress. We had a congressional reporter at that time, the great Jonathan Salant, who followed
One of
her.
my favorite people.
John's a great guy, mentor of mine. And so I didn't follow her as closely in her early days in the House because I've covered state politics. But, I knew of her reputation, former prosecutor, Navy pilot, Trump district slayer. But now she's definitely more moderate than the progressive wing of the party. And yeah, that is very popular, especially in the cities. And that's part of the calculus we were talking about, the black vote, in that so many of them were found Baraka appealing, not just because he was aiming to become the first black governor, but because he had a very progressive agenda.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, she kind of has to show those voters, hey, I can be for you too.
I think if she loses, by the way, I think Baraka has a big future.
Yes, the thought it's been whispered about that he's not done, that we don't know if we'll see any of the other contenders, maybe Philip or Gottheimer. But it's widely thought that if she loses, he's if not the favorite, a favorite for the Democratic nomination.
I think you'll see Gottheimer run for U.S. Senate in 2030, given the fact that Andy Kim, I'm very focused, much more than the average person is, on the Israel issue, given my Jewish background, and I have family that lives over there. But, he cast a few votes that were greeted with disfavor by AIPAC. And I've heard stuff to the effect that he may not run for re-election. That may be idle speculation. But I definitely see a primary there, and I think Josh Gottheimer would be in a terrific position to win it.
It's interesting. The Israel-Gaza situation has colored so much of our politics, because you think about it, Andy Kim was on top of the world when he beat Tammy Murphy in a primary, or she dropped out, but he emerged as the winner of that primary, kind of shook up the political establishment. And I think I wrote in my very first newsletter number one or number two, that the rock star of the Democratic Party was Andy Kim at that time. And we're talking this a while ago. And now Cory Booker is back in fighting for him, looking to run for the White House again. So I don't know if Kim is where he stands with the party in the way that he used to, but a Gottheimer Kim primary would be definitely one to watch. That would be fascinating.
That would be a barn burner. The last topic, and this has been a delightful session. The last topic is the lieutenant governor candidates. Is there anything? Dale Caldwell seemed to me to be relatively innocuous. I don't say that in a bad or good way. I thought, he had a good background as a university president, and also as an African American, he could certainly help her shore up her vote in the urban areas. But there's been all these stories about the audit that he was responsible for, even though there's no finding of malfeasance on his part. But let me ask you, how toxic do you think those stories are, and could that prove to be troublesome to him later on?
Just like with a vice president, the rule of thumb is do no harm first, do no harm. So you don't want someone who adds negative headlines to your campaign. So that's a negative there. But I don't know how many people are going to cast their votes based on running mates or even pay that much attention to running mates. The whole calculus behind picking Dale Caldwell was to go with someone who's a little bit outside of Trenton and someone who could help shore up Black voters. So in that respect, they won. And Jack had a different tact with Jim Gannon, a very liked by members of both parties, to focus on the law and order aspect and to shore up support in Morris County, which is a very critical county of this race because it's a traditionally red county that has trended blue, and it happens to be represented in Congress by Mikey Sherrill. So they both had reasons for their picks. I don't know how much it's really going to bring any voters to the polls per se, but it definitely could help with outreach on either end.
Well, I'll tell you, I met Jim Gannon for the first time a week and a half ago. And I was expecting he'd be a typical, I don't want to use, basically a mediocre politician. I was blown away. He was tremendously impressive, both in terms of knowledge of issues and political acumen. I think that he has a historic role to play here in this respect. Morris County is part of what I call the Great Migration of people who have moved out of Passaic County, out of Bergen County, and they have brought their voting patterns with them, which is often Democratic, which has definitely weakened the Republican hold in Morris County. But he speaks the language of all these various groups that have moved in. He'll be a great communicator with them. So if Chitterelli wins, I think a lot of it will be due to Jim Gannon basically soaking up the support for the Republicans in Morris County.
Yeah, I didn't see a lot of negative. I mean, most people I've heard both. He got praise. I mean, Sherrill himself has tweeted positive things about Jim Gannon. That based on what I heard, doing my story on Black voters in the Black voting bloc, they were very happy with the Caldwell pick. They thought he looks like a good pick, and they were a little, the Black voters were a little bit concerned about the law and order focus on Jack's. But in general, it seems like both were strategic picks, and I just don't know how much either is going to shift the election one way or the other. But, you also need someone who knows how to govern. So the idea is if the governor is out of state or sick or something, the LG steps in. So both seem to be respected people who could do that.
Well, I think that you will have so much to write about. Your newsletter is called Running Down New Jersey, correct?
It's What Makes Jersey Run.
What Makes Jersey Run.
Running theme,
I always forget its name, but I read it all the time because it has that cute cartoon figure.
Yes, Mike Scott, the longtime, he's the sports cartoonist for our paper. I came up with the idea. I said, let's make it a political cartoon, like up the top. And he sent me back this very and no one considers me really menacing. I'm kind of the guy that gets along with everybody sometimes, but there's this nice cartoon at the top. It makes me look kind of menacing. That's a good thing, I guess.
It's the first thing you see when you see your column. This past Sunday, I saw the column and there it was. The cartoon really grabs you. That's why I remembered the cartoon and I forgot the title.
The cartoon wins. Yeah.
The cartoon wins every time.
Yep.
Well, what do we have to look forward to from Brent Johnson? Tell us some of the subjects you're going to be writing about over the next month or two.
Yeah, well, I have the next newsletter this week is going to focus on whether Chris Christie is going to get involved in the governor's race, as whether fundraising or endorsing. I'm going to speak with the governor soon about that. I'm going to be, after Labor Day, it's going to be what to look forward to in the final few months. I have an interview with Bill Bradley coming up to talk about his career. I just did one with Tom Kane, Sr., to talk about his career. So I'm trying to do historical perspectives because a lot of our readers have been around for a while and care a lot about the history of New Jersey politics. So we're trying to make it a grab bag, a kind of a one-stop shop where everything you need to learn about
It's
politics.
great. It's great, and may it always continue. One thing about Barack, you mentioned Bill Bradley.
Yeah.
I had a very good relation with Barack because I was one of the first people to write a column suggesting him as a gubernatorial, and I wrote for New Jersey Monitor. I had followed him closely because of my involvement with the lead service shorelines in Newark, where he did a terrific administrative job on that. So when I saw the job he did, I wrote a column, "Why not Barack for governor?" And he called me on the phone out of nowhere. I had never spoken to him outside of business, and he was very amicable.
Yeah.
So I think that there is a strong future there for him. I think that he's I would use the word beloved in Newark, and he's young enough that he can make this run again. I think that he's not. You haven't heard the last of him.
No, I definitely agree. And he's charismatic in a way Jack is. Like, you often hear the two
Yes.
compared to each other because they're good retail politicians. They meet you where you're at and talk to you. And that's one thing I know the Sherrill people are aware of. But their argument is that Sherrill's the better pick for New Jersey because of the Trump connection. But again, these are all things that are going to work themselves out in the final weeks, and we'll know on November 4th.
I'll end up waking up in the middle of the night thinking about this election. This election is like a great movie.
Yes, it is.
Really
That's a good point.
is. Brent Johnson, I can't thank you enough. I'm going to beg you to come back again.
Oh, anytime.
You are just the ultimate combination of media presence, communication, skillful analysis. And go back to the Met game. If they don't win tonight, I'm going to be calling for a psychiatrist in the morning.
I know it'll be. It's they're too good to be this bad, is what I'll say.
That is a good statement. I'm going Thursday night. I love going to their games because I'm a real character at these games. I get up, I start singing the Met fight song and smoozing and staying around with back in the New York groove. And I was so thrilled that I would leave the game. I would say, "We're going to the World Series," just like Casey Stengel used to call the World Series, the World Series. So I had all this joy. I mean, I've been to Yankee games. It's like rooting for U.S. Steel.
I always joke that their stadium is like going to the world's most expensive dentist office.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, again, the Yankees have all the success, so I understand, but
they're not having the success.
The Mets are more fun.
But yeah, Citi Field is a scene of joy, and that's what baseball should be. It's a game of joy, and hopefully, Brent, as fans, will have more joy. And I'm thankful that I can continue to read your columns, see you on TV, and keep out the outstanding journalism that you personify.
Thank you.
All the best.
Yep, and have me back anytime.
Okay, that's terrific. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a great honor tonight. I want to thank our guest, Brent Johnson, who is a superb political insight. He has good insight on the National League of Baseball, too. And I want to thank my producer, Dr. Yonatan Yaris, the doc, who has made all these shows possible. That's it for this evening. Good evening, and let's go Mets.
Yep.